All right, we are going to go ahead and get started with this webinar. Thank you guys for joining. For those of you who are joining us live, I'll reserve some time at the end of this for us to go over some questions that you may have. We do have a PDF workbook that you can download that you can follow along with the presentation. It's just a way to keep notes, keep things organized as we're going through it. Just as we get started, just a few housekeeping things. This is a part of our summer workshop series. So we're going through an 8-part series to help solo small law firms really develop a stronger marketing plan and maximize their marketing dollars. A little bit about us. We're Nomis Marketing. We're a full service marketing agency for lawyers. I'm a former practicing attorney myself, but just fell in love with content and content marketing. And over time, we have developed a full service agency. We started about 5 years ago, and we've served hundreds of clients across the country. If you want to get in contact with me, my email is here. It's tyler.roberts@nomismarketing.com. I'm happy to talk to you, by email or a short phone call if you have any questions about what we're going to talk about today. So today's topic is defining your intake system. And I am by no means an intake expert, but I've seen a lot of law firms really struggle with intake. And what I've found is that we can do our best work to help generate leads for the law firm through like pay-per-click marketing or SEO or social media. But at the end of the day, it's the intake system that's going to convert that lead into a client. So it's not really marketing, but it is related to marketing. And we want to make sure that we have a really strong intake system in place as we are trying to develop more leads. So the intake system is really that first step of the customer journey. Think about that customer who's coming to your law firm for the first time. They don't know what to expect. And maybe they haven't paid you yet. They haven't paid for the consultation or they haven't signed a retainer agreement. But it's that first interaction that they're going to have with someone at your firm. And you want to make sure that you are kind of holding their hand and guiding them through the process and giving them the best experience possible, because that's what's going to eventually cause them to hire you or sign that retainer agreement. The first thing that we want to figure out is where your leads are coming from. So a lot of times it's a phone call or a form submission, but there are so many ways that a lead can come to your law firm. It could be through live chat. It could be a phone call. It could be a website form, Facebook Messenger, Google My Business Messenger, Instagram DM, SMS messaging, really depending on like the form of marketing that you are pursuing. And so just being able to write out all of these potential avenues that someone could contact your firm is really that first step of figuring out what should our intake system look like and like what points of contact do we need to have in place so that way we can capture these leads. So once you kind of figure that out, right, you know where all your leads are coming from, you want to figure out how you're going to build your lead list. Now, lead list is just what it sounds like. It's a list of leads. This is where all of your contact information for those leads lives. And again, it can come from multiple sources, but you want to funnel it into one place. That way you don't have messages in Google My Business and you have messages in Instagram, and then you've got your form completions and your phone calls. You really want to bring them all into one hub. That way you're able to kind of coordinate communication across multiple platforms. There are a lot of tools out there that allow you to do this, and we'll talk about some of those tools here in just a bit. So you don't want to miss out on business because you're missing out on a communication channel. 75% of consumers prefer private messaging channels versus traditional channels. So there are a ton of free and paid chat features available for your firm. I would recommend having some sort of live chat or some sort of like lead capture like that on your website if you don't currently have one. Also think about incorporating like WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or Instagram DM, just giving people the ability to contact you in a way that feels comfortable to them. We'll talk through kind of what that might look like here in just a minute. So communicating with leads. Once we have our lead list built, we need to figure out how we're going to communicate with them. Are we going to respond directly into that platform in which they contacted us, or are we going to bring them into, let's say, like the inbox and we're going to communicate via email? Are we going to call them back immediately? Are we going to text them? These are all really simple questions, but once you kind of answer them for your firm and you iron it out, you can create a really nice process That way, everyone's on the same page and all of the leads are going to get the same attention, that they should be getting. So 66% of customers prefer mobile messaging. Consumers are 134% more likely to respond to a text and email. I pulled this statistic because a lot of times when I say we, I mean lawyers, we tend to go straight to email, right? We tend to think like, let's coordinate that first call via email, or let's just pick up the phone and call someone. Consumers today are much more comfortable picking up their phone and texting or communicating in that way. And so I think meeting your consumers where they're at is really important. This is obviously different for different practice areas. If you're B2B, email is probably more professional. It's probably more acceptable. But if you're B2C and you're working with underserved or underrepresented communities, like texting, things like that, is really going to help them get connected to the services that they need. So just an action item here, if you aren't texting with clients and that is something that would be beneficial for them, get a phone for your front desk for texting, or find a platform that facilitates texting. So that way you're not on a phone and other people at your firm can jump into the platform and text directly with your clients. So a few action items before we start talking about like the intake process and kind of defining that. You want to figure out just a few things. You want to figure out how you're going to collect leads. So list the current lead sources that you have, and then identify one new lead source to implement in the next week, whether that's live chat or Google My Business chat or Instagram DM, Facebook chat, something like that. Also determine who's going to respond to leads. Write out the name of that person or the company that's responsible for those leads. And if you figure out like that there is no one that is responsible, take that step and decide who should be responsible. A quick hint, it should not be you as the practicing attorney. I've seen way too many law firms put their, when I say law firms, I mean like solo lawyers, put their phone number down as like the intake number, and they're answering the calls on their cell phone. It seems like a good idea in theory, especially for a solo firm. But if you're in court or you're with a client, or it's after hours and you're spending time with family, you're not going to be able to respond directly to that lead. And so finding someone who can be there to respond immediately and kind of delegate that out is really important. You also want to determine where your leads are going to be stored. So figure out how you're currently tracking leads. I've seen law firms use Excel sheets. I've seen them use CRMs. I've seen some law firms use handwritten notes, which is absolutely unacceptable in this day and age. And so you want to figure out like where you're at in that process. Do you have that fully built out CRM where you can funnel all of your leads through that and use that as like your sales engine? Or are you kind of at that beginning phase where you're keeping kind of a handwritten ledger of everyone who's contacting you and you're manually following up with everyone? Also, you want to figure out how quickly you're going to respond. So don't think about this in terms of like what you want to happen. Think about like where you're currently at. If it's taking you a day or 2 days to respond, that's just too long. You want to be able to respond within that first hour of someone contacting you. So again, if you're the one who's responsible for answering the phone and you're not able to get to them right away, find a company and outsource that to them. There's a ton of great intake companies that you can hire for like a fraction of your hourly rate in order to do that initial intake for you. And then you want to figure out what messaging channels you're using. So list all the ways that you're currently communicating with leads, whether that's through your inbox or through a phone call, and then find one that you could leverage in the next week that could open up another communication channel. So whether that's texting, whether that's WhatsApp, or social media or Google My Business, like something like that to kind of open up that portal just to be able to reach more people and allow other people to reach you in a way that they feel more comfortable. Is just one way that you can really start to optimize your intake system. Cool. So have here just a short break to workshop lead lists. We'll keep moving on just for the sake of time, but if you look at that first page in that workbook, it really should help you start to answer some of these questions. Again, I realize they're very simple, but a lot of times this information just lives up in our heads, and it's really difficult to delegate out some of this work and to optimize it and to work on the process if we don't have it written down. So I really encourage you, no matter where you are in your journey, whether you're just starting out or you have a defined system, write that out and really kind of figure out What are some areas in which we could open up another channel of communication? Where could we streamline communication? Where could we get rid of some friction? And that's really what's going to take your intake process to the next level. So we talked about intake being that first touch point that someone's going to have with your law firm. Another way to think about intake is sales. And so again, I'm not a professional salesman. I've done sales for Nomos Marketing, but that's because I love the product that we deliver. I love the clients that we work with, and I love educating. So think about intake in terms of sales. So like taking someone from being a lead to being a client. And I think for a long time, we've taken for granted that if someone calls your firm, that they're going to hire you kind of on the spot. Now there are so many other options someone has when they're hiring a lawyer. They're going to go through a different type of customer journey. And that first phone call may just be exploring your services. So you want to figure out a way to take them from that initial call or that initial form completion to becoming a signed client. And that's really what that intake system is there for. So ask yourself this question. If you got a lead from your website, a funnel, or another platform, what would your office do today? How would they respond to it? I think it's really important to answer this question and do some soul searching, because a lot of times in your head, you have that ideal situation in terms of like what you would hope that the firm would do. But then there's the reality of the situation, which is, the staff's overworked, the phone's ringing with clients calling, and, opposing counsel. We don't have time to hop on a call for 30 minutes to talk to someone who's just exploring our services. So you want to really figure out what the reality of your situation is and look at ways in which you can improve that. So the bar is set just way too low in the legal space for this. Only 40% of law firms are going to respond to an initial email. Only 56% of phone calls are answered by a person. And more than half of firms don't respond to voicemails within 72 hours. So if you can be that law firm that responds to an email immediately, that returns a phone call immediately, that is there to answer the call, you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of your competition. Again, this doesn't mean that you need to have your cell phone on at all times and that you're the one who's texting clients back and answering the phone. You need to be able to delegate this out to an outsourced intake company or to find someone in-house that can do this. But again, they're going to be limited in what they can do. So find that technology, find those people, and find that leverage to really optimize your intake system so that way you can beat the average law firm in this area. So another statistic for you, consumers demand timely communication. 79% of clients expect a response within 24 hours. We go back to this last slide, and they're not getting a response in 72 hours. They've moved on at that point. They are not going to hire your law firm if you have waited that long to respond to them. They want timely communication. And in some cases, it's a very acute need where they're looking for help that day. And even if they aren't, they've put it in their minds that they're going to hire someone that day, right? They've carved out that time. If they've carved out, an hour to explore legal services in their area, it's unlikely that when you call them back a few days later, just randomly throughout, in the middle of the day, that they're going to be able to drop what they're working on or what they're doing in order to have that conversation. So you want to make sure that you're getting back to them in a timely manner. So ask yourself this question: how quickly is your team responding to leads? Does it take an hour? Does it take a business day? Does it take a week? Or is there some sort of automation where there's an instant response to that? And we'll talk about how we can do that here in just a minute. So this is how I kind of break down like where we can find leverage, right? As a solo or small law firm or growing law firm that's, approaching mid-size, how are you going to meet the demand of new leads coming to your door, especially if you're starting to invest in marketing? So look at three kind of points of leverage: people, process, and technology. So first, figure out who's responsible for your marketing, who's responsible for your intake, and who's going to be responsible for follow-up. It can be the same person, but it can also be multiple people. So your marketing could be you. It could be an agency. It could be someone in-house. Intake could be you. That's not ideal, but that could be, where you're at currently. It could be an outsourced intake company. It could also be someone who is internal, right? So figure out who is responsible for your intake system. The next thing you want to do is define your process. So how are your leads communicating with you? How are you tracking your leads? How are you following up with your leads? Just write out like a simple 10-step process of how someone's contacting you and then like how you're following up with them after that initial contact. And then finally, look at your technology. So what tools are you currently using to streamline communication? Where are you storing your leads and what can you automate? So again, a lot of like solo lawyers that we've worked with, they're taking their own phone calls, they're writing it down kind of like in a handwritten ledger, and they're manually following up with people on their calendar. You want to, if you want to optimize that intake process, you really need to look at some different technologies that you can start to leverage. I think the next step is using like an Excel sheet to track your leads. Again, that's not ideal because you're still doing that manual entry. The ideal thing to do is to find some sort of CRM in which you can bring your leads into that CRM and have them kind of stored digitally, and then you can follow up with them through the CRM. We use Zoho as our CRM. We also have a kind of a basic CRM for our clients called CaseClicks. There's Clio Grow, there's Clio Manage, there's Lawmatics. There are so many tools out there that can really help you streamline the intake process and keep all of your leads really organized. So people, process, technology. Look at these three things and look at how you can optimize these to improve your intake system. All right. So like I said before, let's just take a minute today, later today, just write out your current process. Who's responding to your leads? How quickly are you responding? What channels are you using? How many times are you following up? And then do you know where your leads are in your sales pipeline? Are they, do they just contact you? Have they signed a retainer? Are they somewhere in between there? Figure out what steps there are to lead someone from a lead to a client and use that to define your sales pipeline. So I'm going to give you an example workflow here. This is a workflow that I've seen work for a few other law firms. Again, it's highly generalized. So depending on your market, depending on your clients, it could look totally different. But let's just say that we have a form submission. So a law firm receives a form completion or a chat with a lead, name, email, and phone number. So what's the next thing that should happen there? Well, there should be an immediate response. So the law firm needs to immediately send an email to the lead requesting more information. That could be manual. So if you have someone working, full time, or you have an outsourced intake team, they can respond immediately to that lead. You can also set up automations. So if you have a good CRM and you have form completions going in that CRM, you can have like an automated email or an automated text message that goes back out to request that information. 10 minutes later, let's send a follow-up text. So if we haven't received an email response right away, or we just sent that email, let's send someone a text message and just say, hey, we just sent you this email. Please let us know if you have any questions when you're responding to our intake form or whatever it may be. Again, you're reaching out to that client in a way that feels more comfortable to them. A lot of attorneys that we've worked with have had issues kind of with texting because they think it's coming directly from their cell phone. Again, you can find, you can buy your law firm just a cell phone to text from, or you can find a platform that allows you to send SMS messages kind of at scale. Let's say an hour later, an hour goes by, we can say, we're going to call them, right? So we haven't heard back from, we're going to give them a quick call, just following up. Hey, did you receive our email? We want to make sure that you got our intake form. We want to make sure that you understood what the next steps are. We're not ready to schedule a time with the attorney yet. We need to get some more information from you. Day passes by. Let's text them again. Let's email them again. Let's follow up. Let's make sure that we're staying top of mind because, again, we want to capture that lead while it's still hot. 2 days goes by. We're going to send a follow-up email asking if they still need assistance. We'll send another text message just following up from that email. And then the day later, we'll call them back. Hey, just want to make sure that you receive this information. We want to see if we can get you on the phone with the attorney to do a consultation. And then send a final email outlining what the next steps should look like. So again, this is a really quick 3-day process with multiple touch points, but sometimes this is what's required in order to get a client on the phone, especially if they're like searching for multiple attorneys. This timeline can be elongated. You can have fewer touch points. But I think the important thing here is that you're documenting what your follow-up looks like after someone submits their information or there's that initial call. And so just having that documentation is really going to help you kind of figure out like how do I adjust this for my clientele? And like, how do I optimize this over time? So a few action items here. You want to figure out what currently happens when someone completes a form or submits information through your website or a marketing funnel. Who's going to respond to it? What communication channel are they using? Is it text? Is it email? Are they calling? And then what's their response rate? Is the expectation that they do it immediately? Is the expectation that they do it in 24 hours? Or is the expectation that they just do it when they get around to it? Number two, what should happen when someone completes a form? So this is where you can kind of imagine like your ideal situation. So ideally, who's going to respond to that form? What communication channel are they going to use? Are they going to email and then call and then text? Are they just going to give them a call? What's appropriate for your client? And then also, what's the response rate? What's the expectation that you're going to set with your team or your intake team? Is it an immediate response? Is it a response within the first 24 hours? That's something that you get to decide, and you get to hold your team accountable to it. You also want to figure out what follow-up looks like. Are you going to call them? Are you going to email them? Are you going to text message them? How frequently are you going to do that? Are you going to do that every single day until you get them on the phone? Are you going to do it 3 times and then consider them a lost lead? Are you going to put them on a long-term nurture campaign where you're going to market to them through email or through text message for the next 6 months? It really depends on your practice area and what's appropriate for your clients. Then you want to figure out what your follow-up, what should your follow-up look like? That first one is, what does it currently look like, right? So not the ideal situation, but like, what are you currently doing? And I will say that a lot of times it looks like just one phone call or one email follow-up, and then it's just put on the back burner and we forget about it. So I want to encourage you that if you are currently doing that and you're not following up and you don't have multiple touch points with your clients after they contact you, just to introduce 1 or 2 touch points that you could easily leverage in order to get back in touch with those leads. And then finally, what happens when they don't convert? So let's say that you have this really robust intake system and follow-up system, and they still don't sign your retainer agreement. Weeks go by, months go by. What are you going to do to re-engage that lead? For personal injury, criminal defense, it may be a shorter timeline, right? Because like there's a statute of limitations, there might be a court date, something like that. But for estate planning, someone could just be kind of kicking the tires initially, but they may still need estate planning services a year down the road. So are you going to mark that lead as a lost lead? And at what point do you do that? And then are you going to continue to manually contact them, or are you going to put them on some sort of automated sequence where maybe they get your newsletter once a month? Maybe you send them a resource, every couple months. Maybe you invite them to a webinar, just something to stay top of mind with them if they don't convert after that initial form completion or phone call. So that was kind of the big picture in terms of like streamlining your intake system, figuring out like where your leads are coming from, what communication channels you're using, and then figuring out like what you're going to do with those leads once they come in the door. I have a QR code here if you want to schedule time with us just to talk about how we can help you with this process. Again, we have a basic CRM that we have been implementing for our clients that kind of takes people from like an initial lead and brings them into like one system, whether it's through like Google My Business Chat, website chat, form completion, phone call. And it's just a centralized location to kind of store those leads and contact them. So if you have any questions about that, then you can definitely schedule time to talk. But we have a few minutes left here. And so what I'd like to do is stop the recording. And for those of you who are on this webinar live, I'd love to answer any questions. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that here. And